So let's continue day 3 here at the Taj Hotel in central London. Welcome to you if you're joining us from around the world. My name is Ben Thompson. Delighted to be back with you for this day 3 of our studio events. There is a lot for us to talk about, and I want to focus now on the growing influence of India and the global south. And I want to ask the question, are multilateral institutions still working as they should? They do have an important role to play, of course, in making globalization work better. The IMF and the World Bank, as we know, created in 1944, designed to help and sustain global integration. But the big question, are they still fit for purpose? How can we create a genuinely global system? So to help me assess that question, I am pleased to welcome Hemang Jani, who's the Senior Advisor at the World Bank. Hemang, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And let me pose that question to you first of all. We know that these institutions have delivered so much good right around the world. They were created after the Second World War with a very specific remit in mind. But I wonder whether the world has changed sufficiently to reassess how institutions like the World Bank, like yours, can be still fit for purpose.
Absolutely. It's still very early morning here in DC. So good morning, everyone, and good morning. Thank you very much for having me here. I think good that you mentioned about Bretton Woods because exactly after a week in 1944, Lord John Maynard Keynes and the UK delegation, along with the Indian delegation and other delegations, arrived in the east coast of US. And they started thinking about the same question, that what should we do with the world and what should we do with the increasing financing needs for the world. Let me also tell you that during India's G20 presidency last year, India created, proposed a group, independent expert group, which created a report called Triple Agenda for MBB reforms. And that lays out a very good foundation for your question, that are these institutions fit for purpose even today? If not, what needs to change? And the report suggests three things. One is change in the structure, change in the mandate, and change in the way these institutions collaborate. So, on the structure, the institutions strongly support increasing the voice and representation of countries like India and Brazil, who have not only the sizable population but also economic might as well, increasing economic might. Second, on the mandate, see, these institutions were created, as you mentioned, for the post-war era and reconstruction. Then, somewhere in the 80s and 90s, poverty reduction became a very important agenda. But now things are changing. The challenges for this era are very different. We are talking about sustainable development, we are talking about climate challenge, but at the same time, we are also talking about digital transformation. So, one of the reform agenda that all the MDBs are looking at is how do they change the mandate as well and increase their focus on some of these newer areas. And the last point that the report made was on the collaboration. The world no longer can operate in isolation. So, and these institutions also cannot operate in isolation. So, how do we increase collaboration among the institutions? These are the three areas I think that would answer your first question.
Yes, and give me a sense of what needs to change here. This goes beyond just representation on boards, a change in things like voting rights. Let's explore issues, things like leadership selection, things like project priorities. How do we make sure that the Global South has a powerful voice within these institutions?
So it is not only the voice and representation, it is also the way we look at how do we mobilize money for these challenges in these countries and these institutions. For example, a lot of status quo interest does not allow for representation. But at the same time, a lot of institutional inertia and bureaucracies can means that we are not working at the same pace at which we should work. So today is a very fast changing world and the financing needs are also very fast and rapid. So how do we make sure that these institutions are able to deliver the results in time. They are able to deliver the money, and they are able to arrange the financing where and when they are needed. One of the issues that all the banks, MDBs like us are struggling with is how do we reduce our lead time to generate the money. Second issue is, and the most important is, there is a lot more money required on the table than we have today. The report highlights that by 2030, we will need $3 trillion just to deal with climate plus other SDG challenges. So out of that 1.8 trillion, 1.8 billion is required for climate related and sustainable development related issues. 1.2 billion dollars, 1.2 trillion dollar will be required for other challenges like health and education and digital, etc. And the financial institutions are expected to contribute around $500 billion a year. And out of which the banks like us are expected to contribute around $250 billion a year. So how do we arrange and how do we mobilize this massive amount of money? That is another issue. Remember, at the end of the day, all development banks are also banks. So
I
first
wanted
question
to
is
ask
how
you
do
that
you
actually.
mobilize? Yeah.
There is a bit of a delay on the line, so sorry to interrupt. But I mean, where will that money come from? We talked about this yesterday about financing and the access to capital that is so desperately needed when it comes to some of those biggest challenges, particularly around infrastructure and climate change. Where will that money come from?
So three sources. One is, first of all, as I mentioned, MDBs are also banks at the end. And banks, first of all, banks have to optimize their own balance sheets and their own resources. Second and most important is, it's not only governments who think of development in today's world. It is also private sector. So how do we mobilize more private sector money? One number that the report quotes is that the bank should at least leverage their balance sheet 7 to 8 times. So every dollar we receive, the bank should be able to finance 8 times more to the development needs. And of course, increasing the capital base of the banks themselves is also another source of financing. And remember, when we talk about the development challenges, it's not only the financing. The report also talks about how do you generate innovative ways to generate money. For example, guarantees. Now we are at the World Bank itself. We are talking about of a new guarantee platform, which was announced during the spring meetings. So how do we use sovereign guarantees and such innovative ways, innovative instruments also to generate money for development challenges?
The reason I asked you that question about where the money will come from, I wonder whether there are better alternatives, so things like regional development banks, for example. What role do they play in the system about being able to target capital more locally with a better understanding perhaps of local need, rather than these big global institutions that traditionally, as we've discussed, have pivoted to the global north?
Yes, I think, all the regional institutions are also doing well. For example, institutions like AIIB and NDB, they are very good at infrastructure and sustainable development related financing. They are generating a lot of money, and they are able to tackle challenges at the regional level. But that's not the only question. The question is, are these regional and global institutions able to collaborate and generate money more collaboratively and more innovatively? For example, one of the platforms that the bank has created is on collaboration amongst all the different MDBs. So collaboration at the project level, collaboration at the regional level, and collaboration on a long-term level will become one issue. Second, collaboration for innovative financing as well, because a lot of regional banks, they specialize on different issues. As I mentioned, some of them are very good at infrastructure, some of them are very good at climate related
Assessment.
issues. But
Is it
how do
your
you?
assessment that they are very good at collaboration right now, or there is still a significant shortfall? Because it strikes me from what we've discussed as well, they operate in silos still.
Correct. No, that is what I'm trying to mention, that right now all these institutions, they operate in silos, and the report mentions about how do you make them collaborate with each other. All institutions at the end of the day become status quos. All institutions at the end of the day become large bureaucracies, and it is very difficult to make large bureaucracies talk to each other, make large bureaucracies collaborate with each other. So that is the need today, and I'm glad to tell you that all the MDBs and all the financial institutions are already working in this direction. There are various platforms being created. There are already a lot of collaborations happening within these MDBs. See, collaboration is not only a question among the MDBs, it is also a question of within the MDBs. So, for example, at the bank, we are now talking of One World Bank, where all the World Bank Group institutions, they work together at the country level and they create synergies. And similarly, a global platform where all MDBs, they work together at the country level and at the client level. Those are some of the issues I think they are happening right now as we talk.
Give me your sense of what role India plays in all of this as being a model that developing countries may follow. And I think particularly around things like technological innovation, poverty reduction strategies. What would developing countries learn from what India has managed to do vis-a-vis working with these global institutions, but also regional development banks too?
See, India is playing a twofold role. One is, as I mentioned, during the G20 presidency, India created a discussion and debate around how do we reform these institutions. Two of the finest economists, Larry Summers and N.K. Singh, they created this report and it has been received really well. So that was India's initiative during G20 to start discussion around it and start serious thinking about this. Second is India is also right now a beacon of hope and beacon of a very good example on the digital public infrastructure. So how do we make sure that the world learns from open digital networks that India has created through its DPI and through its digital transformation stories? And India is actively working with all the MDBs and all the regional banks to bring stories at light, bring these examples and stories as a lighthouse towards the global south. And how do global south benefit? A lot of countries in Africa and Latin America are already talking to India on how do they bring the digital public infrastructure and digital transformation story of India to these countries. And all regional and global MDBs and institutions can play a big role in bringing this story to the world.
Hemang, Jani, really good to talk to you. Thank you for being with us at RGF this week, Senior Advisor at the World Bank. We are grateful for your time. Thank you. Just to say,
Thank you
that
very much, Ben.
leads us very neatly to our next session. Vikram will be back very shortly looking at digital healthcare and the future of healthcare in the digital space. So don't go anywhere.